Welcome to the fourth module of this e-learning series on public-private partnerships brought to you by the World Bank and DFID. In this module, we will learn how to select the appropriate procurement technique, how to design a procurement work plan, and how to promote and market PPP bidding and investment opportunities. In the previous module, you learned how to manage and complete public-private partnership feasibility studies. It is important to remind you that this mode of teaching is a participatory one. That means you'll be drawing on the knowledge and experience of other learners such as yourself. Let's begin this module by looking at the PPP tendering process. Do we have any procurement officers in the room? All right, has anyone been involved in a procurement? Oh, okay, you have. So can you, what is procurement?
Let me define it practically because I've never I've never taken that profession.
Practical is what we want.
Practically is or according to the Public Procurement Act, the process of procurement is when the institution or the authority advertises to the public that when it needs service from supplies or services,
right,
like collection of revenues. So where the bidders or the interested parties, they apply according to the specifications advertised in the tender adverts. So under that condition, within a certain period, the tender is opened, and processed under the evaluation committee. So we get some qualified bidders who will be proceeding to the tender board, and the tender board will approve the winner, and the winner will be announced in the public. So this is the conventional process that
absolutely
we always
perfect. That was a really good description of procurement. So governments buy things all the time. They buy paper. They buy paper towels. And they go to the market and they look for the lowest responsible bidder, and it's competitive, and they bring it in. And it works out fairly well. Well, public-private partnerships hold to those principles, but they're a little different, and you'll see they're a little more complex. Why is it important to have sound procurement? A good procurement process, whether it's for a public-private partnership or any project or supply or service. Why is it important to have good procurement?
We need to have the good procurement so as to satisfy our needs.
You need to satisfy your needs.
Yes.
What else do we need to do, though? So this hotel, where we are, they buy things all the time. They buy everything from the sugar that we have in the dining room to towels for the bathrooms. So they have to satisfy their needs, but they don't necessarily issue requests for qualifications or requests for proposals. They go out and buy things, right? They might shop. They're certainly going to shop around for the best price, the best quality. But in the public sector, why do we have such a public process that John described? Like, why do we have that? Yes, Betha.
We have to have a sound procurement processes because we need the whole process to have accountability and transparency, but also to ensure that the person who are going to be given the tender to conduct the project is well qualified and has passed all the stages or all the qualifications that we are looking for.
Exactly. The big phrase you use there, the most important word, is that in terms of accountability. Accountability is critical. Remember, going all the way back to Monday, we talked about these projects have to be in the public interest. And in public procurement, you're looking to protect the public interests because you're using the public's money, their tax money, to purchase services, supplies, public-private partnerships. So You use the phrase open and transparent. That's one of the principles. So when we have sound procurement, we have good governance. It's very critical. One of the things you'll find, particularly with respect to public-private partnerships, for the potential private partner to pursue these projects, it's expensive. It can be pretty expensive. So, for instance, if we want a private partner to design, build, finance, operate, maintain, say, a fairly involved bus terminal with commercial operations, let's say it costs 50 billion Tanzanian shillings. How much do you think it may cost to bid for that project, for the private partner to put their proposal together? Just take a wild guess how much you think they might have to spend of their own money with no guarantee that they're going to win. So let's say it's 50 billion shillings. It could be 1% of that, and what would that be, 500 million shillings? It's expensive. It's very expensive to put these together, because let's say for that bus terminal, they're going to have to engage an architect, an engineer. They're going to have to engage lawyers, financial experts. They're going to have to do a lot of work, planners. They got to put a lot of work into these proposals. So if you want them to compete for it, you want to attract them to your project, they don't want to be in a project where the procurement is sloppy, okay? They want a tight procurement, sticking to schedules, open and transparent, as was said here. If we have good procurement, we have more competition. If we have more competition, we get better value for money, right? Just as if you were going to sell something, if you're going to purchase something, if there are a lot of people competing for your shillings to purchase it, they're going to try to give you a better product, okay? So we want competition, okay? If in our procurement, we want a framework that lowers the risk of failure and increases accountability, as you said, and demonstrates a really good use of the public funds. Okay, so sound procurement's critical. Some of our underlying principles, we do not discriminate between proposals. We treat everyone equally. Betha mentioned transparency. This next one's can sometimes be a little tricky. A lot of times, particularly again in public-private partnerships, you may have a proposer that is maybe providing something that is proprietary in nature, meaning it's kind of unique to them. It's what gives them a competitive advantage. They would like to have that information treated confidentially. You may ask them in terms of your due diligence when they submit the proposals to provide financial statements, things such as their balance sheet, for instance, perhaps income statements. So you're going to get to look at their financial health. Well, they probably don't want their competition also looking at that. So there's confidentiality issues. And obviously we're going to use a contract here. So some of the ways we make this all come together. We certainly want to have good, solid procurement documents. We had a brief presentation yesterday from our friends in the room next door who talked about how they're looking to standardize various documents. That'll go a long ways into improving public-private partnership procurement. We talked about some of the principles. Need to recognize that PPP procurement is a little more complex than standard issue procurement for publicly financed projects. Why is that? Why do you think it's more complex?
Okay, thank you. Actually, I may consider two issues that may make it complex compared with this normal public procurement. One of the issues is capital investment. In a public partnership, the investment capital is more bigger compared with other public forms. But another one is the time of the contract. Actually, in a public procurement, the contract is not bigger than the PPP project. That's why it's called this to be more complex compared with another one.
Right. So we're going to ask our private partner. They may be asked to design the project. They're going to be asked to invest in the project. And good thing that interesting that you pointed out. We're talking about something that's much longer in length. So the contract itself is going to be more complex. It's going to, if you think about it, if through standard public procurement and traditional public finance, as the government, we hire a contractor, a private construction company, to build a school for us. We, the government, we're going to design it, we're going to pay for it, we're going to operate it, but we hire a private construction company to build it. That's a fairly standard short-term contract. The contract may be for 18 months. And those contracts are written all the time. Now we may have a contract that's going to last, say, 30 years. And in that contract, we're going to try to anticipate everything that could happen over 30 years. I don't know about you, but I have a tough time sometimes anticipating what's going to happen next week. So we're going to have to look very far forward. The other thing that's happening is in that contract, we're allocating risk. Something that, again, in a standard procurement, usually the government's assuming almost all of the risk. So now we're going to have to spend time on figuring that out. Be aware, be forewarned that the time it takes to prepare a project for public procurement and the public procurement itself for PPP is generally longer than it is for a standard design, bid, build contract. That's the traditional public procurement. So it's going to take longer because we're asking our private partner to do more. Not only are they being asked to do more, so they need some time to put their proposals together, it's going to take time on our side to evaluate those proposals. Depending on the project, sometimes you will engage with the market even before your tendering documents. I may have mentioned earlier, I'm involved in a project right now. No tender documents have been issued, none. But we, together with the government, have been talking to potential participants in the procurement, really kind of going back to not unlike what we talked about with our screening of potential projects, but we want to learn if they would be actually interested in the project. If they're interested in the project, are there any conditions or issues that need to be addressed before we go to the market? Because we want to have a very tight procurement. So it's fine to go and engage with the market to get some feedback from them. By the way, it doesn't mean they're automatically become part of a short list. It doesn't mean that anyone that wasn't talked to or spoken with about the project is excluded from the procurement. No, we're just out there talking to the market. Because these projects, these PPPs, can be more complex, it can give rise to bid protests, right? Parties that don't win, remember, they may also be spending a lot of money to try to win these projects. If they don't win, if they think your process was a little hinky, which is a technical term for not following all the rules, they may file a protest. So it's very critical you do that. As I said, it could take longer to evaluate the process. Here's a question for you. So we go through our let's stick with our bus terminal example. We go through and we select our preferred bidder. Our preferred bidder is given a contract. In the project, they have to design, build, finance, operate, and maintain the bus terminal. The bidder is given a contract. The preferred bidder signs the contract. We, the government, countersign the contract. Do we have a project? Can they start building the project? They have a signed contract. The contract's been fully approved. It's gone through the process within the government in terms of all the necessary approvals. Can they begin the project? How many think they can begin the project?
Depend on the terms of the contract, because at some point the contract will insert the clause saying at what time you need to go and start maybe if it's a construction.
So let's say all the permits are in place.
Okay.
So all the permitting to build and everything, they're all in place. We have our contract. Can the private partner start construction?
Yeah, if I have given the vacant possession of the facility place or the facility land.
That's a good intuitive response.
It's wrong to take that attitude because there is institutional regulations that has to be followed. But
Now, all the institutional approvals, everything's been done.
Okay, then?
So can we start construction?
Yeah, you can start the construction, but based on the contract which stipulated the issue of when to start the construction.
So those are all smart answers. But there's something a little unique sometimes with public-private partnerships. We have our contract closing, commercial closing, meaning we've signed the agreement. That makes sense. Usually there's a lot of celebration around that. We're very happy. One of the things you'll learn when we talk about finance, it doesn't necessarily mean they can start construction. The reason being is they still have to borrow the money a lot of times. And the only way they can borrow the money is to have a contract that they can take to the lender, the bank, and say, hey, see, we have our contract. Now, please give us money that you said you would give us. So you'll see when we talk in procurement or if we discuss project finance, in public-private partnerships, sometimes you have what we call two closings. We have a commercial close, that's the contract stage. Then we have a financial close. The financial close is when the project's fully funded, when all the money goes in. If you don't have the money, you can't build something. So just to make you aware of that. All right, so here's why I think you're here this morning, is to learn about the process for procuring public-private partnerships. So first thing we did way back when, we identified the needs, the public interest, how the public interest is going to be satisfied, that there was a genuine need for the project. So that was done. Came up with a plan for moving forward with the project. That's part of our feasibility work. We could have, as again, another caution, just to let you know, I'm going to show you all the stages in a procurement. What you will learn is you don't always need to do all of the stages. We'll get around to that. So we could have something what we call RFEI or an EOI. Any guesses what that may stand for, that alphabet soup?
Looks for expression of interest.
Expression of interest, EOI, or requests for expression of interest, RFEI. So that's that. We'll talk about what that is. RFQ, what does RFQ mean? Request for qualification, very good. RFP, okay. And if we get our RFP, we get our proposals in, then we have a closing. We could have, as I said, two closings, our commercial closing and a financial close. And then once we have our financial close, implement the project. It's fully funded. You could start building and operating. Okay, So this document, remember I said that public-private partnership procurement can be expensive both for the government to conduct as well as for the private parties to respond to? So this document, the expressions of interest, do you think this is an expensive document for the government to put together? Is it a difficult and expensive document to draft? Hands up? No? Okay. Is it not? Is it a relatively inexpensive document to draft? Right? Okay. We got one. I think we got one back here. It is. This document is literally just that. Are you interested? If we do this project, are you interested? I've done these documents. Sometimes it's one page. Sometimes it's one paragraph. Like, are you interested? If you are, here's an email address. Please email us and let us know. That could be the entire document. You know, it doesn't take much to do. Sometimes it could be that RFEI sometimes could be like request for, or be an RFI, request for information, where you may ask respondents, are you interested? And by the way, if you're interested, or is there anything that we should know about this project, or any advice you might give us before we start soliciting proposals? So you're going to use the market. I mean, they're the experts out there. Let's see what they have to say. Now, let's be clear. They're going to want to make suggestions that might help themselves. That's fine. But you'll find things that they suggest that are helpful. Okay. Request for qualifications. I'll describe it. Usually the RFQ, as it's referred to, will present a brief overview of what you're trying to do, what the scope of the project is. They will provide what we call an SOQ, Statement of Qualifications, which will highlight their experience, their technical capabilities, their financial capabilities. Is this an expensive document to put together on your side? And is it an expensive document for the private sector to respond to? Well, it's not terribly expensive. It's more time consuming than our first document, the EOI. This one is, you're going to have to spend some time kind of figuring out what you want the project to do. You may have in here, you put your output specifications, again, what you want to accomplish with this project. But for the private parties, in the RFQ, it's literally just their qualifications. A lot of that stuff they already have files on. You're not asking them to give you a proposal on what, let's stick with the bus terminal. You're not asking them to tell you how they're going to build the bus terminal or how they're going to finance the bus terminal. You're not doing any of that. You want to know, do they have experience in, say, building and operating bus terminals? Do they have access to financing to fund the project? This is really just that. Are they qualified? Are they qualified to pursue this project? Finally, we have a request for proposals. Now, this one can be quite expensive. I was recently involved with a public-private partnership. I was on the private side, where we made a proposal to actually design, build, finance, operate, and maintain a courthouse through a public-private partnership. To put that proposal together cost about $2 million US. And there was no guarantee that we were going to win that project. So this one takes a lot of time and effort. And it's also very involved on your side, on the government side. The document itself, you will have already have most of the information, so it's not an extremely difficult document to write. but you'll find that there's a lot more that you now need to provide. So like any of the studies you've done, you want to make available to them. You might have to give them tours of the site. We'll get into about responding to questions they may have. So it becomes more labor intensive at this point. All right, I'm going to kind of move to this right here. So this one, what I'm about to show you, this is what we refer to as two-stage procurement for public-private partnerships. Again, a little bit of a warning, you don't always have to use all of these steps. If you can compress it, fine, and we'll talk about how and when that's appropriate. So, I could have had another box up here for our EOI. I didn't put it up there. That way it looks very, very neat. So we have a request for qualifications. Let's say for our bus terminal, let's say 12 companies submit their statement of qualifications. They respond to this RFQ, 12 companies. First question I have for you, are you happy? Are you happy that 12 companies responded? Yes. What would have made you really unhappy or embarrassed? If no one did, right? No, you're very happy that you had 12 responses, okay? So we've had 12 firms, an even dozen, respond and submit their qualifications to develop a public-private partnership bus terminal. It has commercial space, office space. It's quite involved. So we have that. And they're generally pretty good firms from a technical and financial standpoint. We talked about competition. So this is good so far. So now I have a question for you. We have this RFQ stage. Now, at some point, we're going to have to advance and actually get their proposals. All we have from them now are their qualifications. The qualifications will go through what's involved in that, what we want to hear. Well, let me ask you. What do you want to know from these firms in terms of their qualifications? What are some of the things you'd like to ask? Whether they have experience. Have they done this before? Have they done this before in your country? Have they done it before in your region? Have they actually worked on public-private partnerships? How successful have they been? What else might you want to know?
The experts that they are having their company.
Okay, you might want
for the project.
Who are their key individuals? That's a good one. What's their background?
Yes.
Okay. What else might we want to know?
Sources, the resources where they can use them.
So financial resources. Do they have access to financing? These are some of the things we want to know. Are there any, those, by the way, all those things, experience, personnel, financial resources, that's where they're kind of saying all the good things about themselves, right? They're not going to say anything bad. Let me ask you, though. Do you want to know if there's anything bad in their background? Right? Yes. You want to know, have any governments barred them from procurement? Are they in any kind of litigation? Right? Have they had projects that failed? You want to know the good, you want to know the bad, right? So, getting back, we have 12 of them. They seem to be generally pretty good firms. So now we need to move to the request for proposal stage. Do we say, you know what, these seem to be pretty good firms. We have a lot of them, which is good. Do we now say, all 12, we want you to submit proposals. You've been invited to respond to our RFP. Should we do that? What do we think? We have 12 firms. Generally, they have good qualifications, nothing terribly negative in their backgrounds. Should we issue the RFP to them and have them respond to the RFP, the request for proposals?
Yeah, it's what you normally do. You can shortlist for the best.
Okay, so you're saying shortlist,
Yeah,
but we had 12 of them.
yeah,
Do we think that if we have 12, we get better competition?
yeah,
So should we have all 12 respond to the RFP?
yeah. They can respond.
That's actually, again, intuitively, it seems to make sense. But remember, these can be expensive undertakings. We said for that 50 billion shilling bus terminal project, it might cost 500 million for them to put their proposal together. If they have only a 1 in 12 chance of winning, and they're going to have to invest that much money in putting the proposal together, do you think they really want to take that chance? Their odds are not very good. So we have one of the things we want to do, and we don't always do it, by the way, but it's a good practice, is have a short list of candidates, as you suggested. And the short list, if we have a lot of, if we receive a large response to the RFQ, that short list might be only 3 or 4 firms. And I said the 12 firms that responded were generally qualified, nothing terribly negative. Well, that's where your work comes in. You have to do a lot of work to get it down to maybe 3 or 4 firms. Think about it. If they're going to spend that much money to put a proposal together, there's a big difference between having a 1 in 12 chance and having a 1 in 3 or a 1 in 4 chance. Your odds go up substantially. So kind of very, very critical to do that. Quick question, if let's say you were one of the firms, put yourselves on the private sector side. If you were one of the firms that did not make the short list, how do you feel? Are you mad? Are you angry? Are you relieved? What do you think you are? You're disappointed, right? You wanted to make the short list. You put some time in to respond to the RFQ. But I'll tell you what, you will find that they're disappointed. They're professional about it. They would be angry, on the other hand, if there was no short list, all 12 moved to the RFP stage, including themselves, and they never had a chance to win anyways. You know, they were 12th, and they just spent all this money with no chance to win, and they just wasted maybe a year and a half of putting some together where they couldn't win. And they may have lost 500 million shillings in the process. So short list has a lot of advantages. And if you have that short list, 3, maybe 4 firms, they put a lot more effort into coming up with a proposal. I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
It's nice if you give yourself a hard work of shortlisting people who are qualifying for RFQ or for bringing their proposals. For me, I would think it's better, because I know these people are in the same industry, it's better for them technically to shortlist themselves. If they find themselves they are 12 in the second stage, they could come and discuss and let them maybe 2 or 3 apply for the what? For the proposal on the work. Mm-hmm. Because I think sometimes you could sometimes you could bring a conflict of interest if we shortlist someone who thinks is the same as the other one. And then you go against the principles of procurement. Yep. So for me, I think these people are in the same industry. If it's a water project, they are all in the water industry. Let them do their thing to shortlist themselves, and then they'll come up 3 or 5.
One of the things that you'll see in the actual documents one of the things you want to be very careful about is you want to avoid collusion, where they kind of get together and figure out amongst themselves who's going to win which project, and they start, because you start losing your value for money proposition because they're not competing against each other. The other thing too is it's human nature. The executives with these companies, their compensation, their raises, their bonuses are based on winning these things. So they're not going to like, oh, we're all in the same, we're all friends in the same industry. Let me help you out on this project. That doesn't really happen. By the way, getting 12 responses to the RFQ, well, I shouldn't say that. I've seen it. I have seen that happen. Now, I also want to say, you'll see in the next slide, we don't always need to have a short list. There's projects we can just move straight through, but we'll get to that in a moment. So, all right, so let's say we have our short list. Another question. I'm going to move we're going to accelerate. We're going to go forward. So we go through, we issue the RFP to the short list. We pick a preferred bidder, a winner. So we pick that company. Do we then give them a contract? Or do we start negotiating the contract with them once we pick the winner? Well, we do need a contract to hold this together. So when we choose the winning proposal, does that mean we now start negotiating a contract with the preferred bidder?
To me, I won't issue them the contract and we just sign, because we both need to sit down and negotiate the terms and see if the private parties and the public side agrees to the terms within the contract.
So I missed the first part. Do you want to negotiate the contract after you pick them?
After I pick them.
After you pick them, right.
Yes.
You negotiate the contract.
Yeah.
Again, very intuitively, that's kind of what you would think. The fact is, you really don't want to do that. And I speak from experience. I learned from my own mistake. I had a project where we waited until we chose the winner, a very good company, and then we started negotiating the contract. Well, they in hindsight, they kind of had us over a barrel. We had chosen them, and they knew that, for us to abandon them and go back, after putting all this time in negotiating a contract with them, that means we're going to have to start it over with whoever came in second. It was a mess. And there's also a question of fairness. So one of the things as a good practice, we've shortlisted firms from our RFQ. We're going to be moving to our request for proposals. One of the things that should have been happening in parallel in here is we should have our lawyers drafting a contract. It's going to be in draft form. And when we issue the RFP, we should issue the draft contract with the RFP. There are a lot of benefits to it. One is to avoid this drawn-out negotiation. The other part of it is that now our short list, you'll give them an opportunity to comment on the contract. Now, again, they will comment in their own self-interest, but you will find that they will have some suggestions that make a lot of sense. And so you can redraft the contract and incorporate those changes in. But at some point, you want to make the contract final. And the other big advantage is when we have the 3 or 4 firms on our short list submit their proposal, they're all submitting to the same contract, the same terms, the same length, the same payment requirements, everything. So now you can judge all of the proposals on an equal footing. By the way, I keep on throwing out this word proposals. What kind of proposals are we receiving? Do we get one proposal? Do we get, let's say we have 3 firms on our short list. Do you want, and it's our bus terminal again. So do we want to get a document that includes both their technical proposal? Remember, they're going to design, build, finance, operate, maintain. Do we want them to submit us a document with copies that includes their technical proposal and their financial proposal? We got to know what they're going to build, and we do need to know what payment arrangements they want. So do we get a document that contains both of those? Yes and no. The yes part is we need both of those. The no part of it is we typically ask for those in separate envelopes to be delivered separately. Why would that be? Why do we want that separately?
Want it separated because at the initial stage, we just only evaluate the technical proposal. Thereafter, after we get the winners from the technical proposal, thereafter you can open its financial proposal.
Right. So we want to make sure technically their proposal is compliant, meets our output specifications. If it doesn't, we don't really need to worry too much about their financial proposal. So we want to make sure it's compliant. The other thing that we want to avoid is what I like to call bias or sticker shock. It's where if somebody submits a proposal and we look at the financial proposal first, let's say it's, and there's payment arrangements in there, and we're like, wow, this is really good for us financially for the government. Or let's say it's a concession where this happens in airports where you'll see in a moment that the private partner is going to make a large payment up front for the project. And you're like, wow, look at all this money we're going to get. And let's open up the technical and see what, okay, that looks fine, we don't care. And let's get the money. You want to make sure technically the project's sound. You don't want to be overly influenced by the financial proposal. So the practice is typically to examine the technical proposal first and that they're delivered separately. So we have the RFP is issued with the draft contract. It takes time. The time could be anywhere from 60 days, 2 months, to 3 months to respond to that RFP. We evaluate it and we select the preferred proposer. That's, in a nutshell, on one PowerPoint slide, what goes on in 2-stage procurement. I said sometimes you could do it really in what we call 1 stage. These are for projects that tend to be much simpler, fairly common, that you already know the participants. The participants are fairly familiar with it themselves. Again, you still, basically the step you're skipping is you're not going to have a request for qualifications. A lot of times these projects involve projects where the primary criteria is going to be financial, but you still want to have a draft contract. You don't want to negotiate the contract after you pick the bidder. So all we did was we eliminated the RFQ stage. We just have an RFP stage. These are done. All right, so that's the general overview. Ned, a little later, is going to talk about marketing public-private partnership projects and the tendering documents. Evaluation criteria, very critical. In our evaluation criteria, this is critical. You want to try to avoid qualitative judgments, but it's hard to do so. Going back to that bus terminal, in our technical proposal, what are some of the evaluation criteria you think you might use for the technical proposal? What would for a bus terminal? What might be some of the technical evaluation criteria?
Similar project.
Well, we have the experience one already because we had that in the RFQ. We're at the RFP stage. Now we're going to figure out who we're going to choose. So what would be some technical criteria? Yep, John.
I would love to look at the designing of the bus station, how the bus alignments are, the entry, the outside.
One of the things you want to know is what is it going to look like?
Yeah.
Right? How is it going to function? Well, think about the question of what is it going to look like. You ever hear the phrase "beauty is in the eye of the beholder"? That's a tough judgment. You know, that's a qualitative judgment. You want to be fair in your judgment, but it is important. You know, the functionality of the new facility, how that's going to work, the programming they have in terms of what they want to do in terms of commercial space, retail space, restaurants, if they put them in their offices. These are things you want to examine in the technical proposal. How long they think it's going to take to build, important, all that stuff, okay? Financial proposal, let's say it's a bus terminal. What are some of the things you might want to look for in the financial proposal? Let me give you a little help. How would, what would the financial arrangement be between the government and the private company in, say, a bus terminal? How would the private company make money?
So in that case, we have to use user charges for the passengers who, for example, passengers who are get into the bus station, they have to pay. The bus themselves, they'll be charged a fee for using the
right.
The
So
lines.
the buses will have parking fees.
Parking fees, yes.
We're going to rent out commercial space.
Commercial
so there's gonna be
space,
rents.
exactly, yeah.
So we would like to know what they forecast in doing so. The other thing is the government may be wanting to share in the revenue from the project. We want to know what our revenue share is going to be. So that could be a criteria. Importantly, though, we want to provide a template to proposers, say, like in the financial proposal. Oftentimes, we will provide them an Excel spreadsheet and ask them simply to fill in the numbers. Because, we want to be able to judge it across everybody working off of the same basis. One of the things that you will see is PIM up there. Stands for Project Information Memorandum. Ned will talk a little bit more about this during the marketing phase. Yes, I'm sorry.
I have a question concerning the financial issue.
Sure.
Is it not necessary to know where are they going to get the fund for the project?
Right. I'm glad you brought that up. So in terms of where are they going to obtain their funding from? So let's say, again, it's our bus terminal. What would you do in terms of, what would you ask for?
Because the project need fund, and it is expensive
Right.
in terms of the structure. If it is the building, we need a lot of money to
They need
build it.
money.
Yeah.
But what would you
So-
have? What would you seek as evidence of them able to get the money?
I would have asked for them to clarify, to say where are they going to get the fund from, whether it is loan, or
Right.
it is from donor, or it is
Yep.
something like that.
Right.
So I have to know where are the sources from.
Okay.
Because I have to get guaranteed that they are going to do this project.
Right. So oftentimes what you'll ask for, provide evidence of them able to obtain funding, is what they would call letters of intent. So banks would issue letters of intent that say, provided that you're selected as the preferred bidder, we're prepared to lend you money for this project. And then there's always a paragraph that says, subject to, it doesn't guarantee that they're going to get the money. The bank will still want to do their own due diligence, but it's the intent. And so that's actually a very good point. You want to know that they have access to funding. There are just some other things in terms of communicating with potential bidders. There's the phrase, the data room. Remember, you did all this feasibility work yesterday when we went through the second module. The data room oftentimes will include your feasibility reports. You don't guarantee any of the information in there. It's up to them to verify independently. But the data room, in the old days, the data room was just that. It was physically a data room where there'd be paper reports in there. They would have to sign up to go visit that room. There might even be a copying machine in there. Nowadays, virtually everything's virtual, it's electronic. They're given an access code to obtain the information. Site visits, they want to go see where it's going to be, where you're going to build the bridge, the school, the bus terminal, the abattoir. Bidders conferences, these are important. These are also sometimes funny. You could have these conferences before the RFP. It could be before you issue the RFQ, or actually after you issue the RFQ. You invite the people that are interested to come in and ask questions. I always say these bidders conferences oftentimes, or do you remember when you were, myself included, when we were younger, you might be in high school or secondary school, and there'd be a dance. The boys would always be on one side of the room, the girls would be on the other side, and everybody would just look at each other. A lot of times these conferences are just that. You give them a chance to ask questions, and everybody just kind of looks at each other because they're afraid if they ask a question, they're going to give something away. But then usually the room loosens up and they do start asking questions. Again, if the project's a little more complicated, say like a bus terminal, on your side as the government, usually it's more of a hearing. You listen to the questions, take them down. So if they ask you, when are the responses due with the RFQ? It says on the document that responses are due at 4 o'clock on Friday, November 7th. Is that 4 o'clock a.m. or is it 4 o'clock p.m.? And you go, oh, okay, it's 4 o'clock p.m. Pretty easy answer. They might ask you, your document says that there must be parking for 200 automobiles at the facility. Can we provide that by providing a double-deck structured parking garage? You don't answer them. You kind of, okay, think it. You take the question down. You're going to get a lot of questions during this procurement process. You'll answer them eventually, but you want to think about your answer. You don't just kind of give it off the cuff, or what we say, just spontaneously. Think about what you want to say, and then let everybody know about it. The other thing is you'll have communication where they're going to be able to reach out to you, email you with questions. So if you ask a question, and I'm the procurement officer in the government, and you email me and you ask me a question, and I have an answer, do I email back the answer to you? What do I do with that answer? You asked me a question. Do I send the answer back to you? You want an answer, so you should get an answer, right? Well, if you receive a question and you come up with an answer, you let everybody know what the answer is. But what you do is you keep him anonymous. You don't say where the question came from. You want, the more information out there, the better. Just again, some simple things in terms of receiving the bids. Just from a practical standpoint, one of the things I like to do is make sure we have a checklist First thing we want to do is make sure those bids are compliant. If we say we want one original one original document and say 5 copies, that's part of our checklist. Did they do that? If they didn't, they're not compliant. The story I always like to tell was that airport project I showed you on Monday is as part of the submission, they had to submit certified funds of 10,000 US dollars. That did a couple of things. One was, it meant they were serious. They all could afford $10,000. But it also kind of, collecting that $10,000 helps set aside, helps mitigate some of our transaction advisory costs. Well, this has never happened to me before. Usually when proposals are due on a Friday at 4:00 p.m., when do you think the proposals arrive? Hopefully before 4 o'clock. This is the only time where I ever had a proposal come in the day before. It arrived on Thursday. Never had that happen. I mean, that's fine. But it arrived a day early. So my procurement team, we didn't start examining the proposal, but they did that checklist, that everything, they submitted everything that's required. One of them being $10,000 in certified funds. They opened up an envelope. There was a bank draft, certified funds bank draft in there for $9,996. It was not $10,000, meaning they were not compliant. Well, good for them. They had submitted it early. The RFP allowed for interaction. We contacted their lawyer, their New York lawyer who delivered the project. Submitted the documents. The company was from the United Kingdom. We called them up, we called the lawyer up and said, hey, thank you for the proposal, but by the way, you're $6 short. You're not compliant. And we couldn't call the firm in the United Kingdom. It was too late. And he said, I was like, oh, can I get right down there? And he said, I can give you I'll give you a certified check for $6. It said, yeah, fine, that's fine. It could be a $5 and a $1 bill together. Doesn't matter how it comes in. Turned out what happened was he had his assistant go to the bank to get a certified check from the bank. And the bank said, oh, we have a $6 processing fee. And the assistant said, oh, just take it out of the $10,000. That's what happened. The interesting thing is, if one of their competitors found out, the competitor would have grounds to nullify the entire process over $6. And this is a project worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So you have to be very careful about this stuff. Most embarrassing thing, you issue your request for proposals and what happens? No one shows up. What's the most difficult thing that happens in a RFP? So most embarrassing is that we have no responses. What would be the most difficult thing? What if you only get one proposal? Right? So you don't have any other proposals to judge it against. What would you do then? Well, it happens. If you have several options. First thing is you want to go and check, like, did we do this right? Our tendering. You could make a decision that let's cancel the procurement and let's retender the project, make some changes. You could also start entering into a negotiation with that one bidder and see if you could arrive at the best value for you. I had this happen where we had one bidder, and what we did was we commissioned, their technical proposal was fine, it was compliant, but financially we were trying to figure out if we were really getting the best deal, so we commissioned an independent evaluation. This was a project that was going to be a concession. The government was going to receive money from the private partner. we had another firm come in, for lack of a better word, an appraiser, appraise the project. And the appraiser came back and said the private partner should be paying the government, I think something like 8% more than they had promised to pay the government. And this was, in terms of the approvals process, there was a three-person panel representing the legislature, the governor, I forget the other party, and they wanted all the documentation, so we came up and said, okay, here's our proposal. We think they're a good proposal, but the appraiser says 8% more, but we think we still should go with them. And this panel said, no, we're not going to approve the deal unless the private party pays more. So I went back to my boss and I said, you know, that's the situation. They won't pay more. And he God bless him, my boss asked me these questions. He said, did you run a fair procurement? The answer was yes. Did you market it widely? The answer was yes. He said, so you went to the market, everybody knew about it, but you only got one proposal. One of the reasons was it was a difficult project. He said, you only got one proposal. And you have this appraiser who says they should be paying more. If the appraiser thinks the project's worth more, why doesn't the appraiser come up with the money and pay it themselves? Which I thought was brilliant. He said, if the appraiser thinks it's so valuable, have them pay the money. And I went back to that panel that had to approve the project, and I said just that. And there were a lot of economic benefits to come from this project. That also carried the day. We ended up getting the project approved and built. It worked out quite well. So that's a different thing. The other thing that could happen is if we get, again, this happens generally where the financial proposals are very close. Let's say we have 3 proposals, they're very close financially. You can go back to them and see if they can sharpen the pencil and improve their financial offers. We call that best and final bids. Just as if you were going to sell your car or sell your home, something, you don't always take the first offer. You can go back and ask them to improve their bids as well. I'm not going to talk about bid protests, but if you follow all the rules, you should be safe. We talked about getting to financial close. There are what we call conditions precedent to a financial close. So one is you got to have that commercial close. You got to have a contract, typically. All permitting usually needs to be in place. You have to have all the approvals. And then there's things just more from a technical standpoint, like utilities, things like that. You need to have those in place. All right, so some of our fairness principles. We talked about all parties having access to the same information. You want to provide them as much information as possible so they can make an informed proposal. Access to the opportunity. The criteria really need to reflect your output specifications, what you want the project to do. Make sure this is sometimes is forgotten. Establish that criteria early, and don't change it or don't change the goals once you're in procurement. Okay. Last thing, I want to show you an actual procurement, public-private partnership procurement. This won't be as much a case study as what Ned's going to cover, but this is an airport in the Caribbean, in the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. It's San Juan International Airport. It's the busiest airport in the Caribbean. This was their feasibility study, where they looked at different options. The airport was, although it was the busiest, it was poorly maintained. I can tell you, and something I suffered recently here, the air conditioning in the terminal rarely worked. I went down there quite a bit. So they conducted a feasibility study looking at what their options were. They essentially looked at two options. One was, okay, the government just needs to invest more money in the airport. Then they looked at what the P3 option was, the PPP option, which they went with, and that's what they chose. They decided to seek a public-private partnership for the improvement of the airport. That feasibility study was in June 2010. This is essentially their project information memo. It was a little bit of a market teaser, kind of just had some basic information about the airport and what the opportunity was. This gentleman, David Alvarez, was the executive director of their PPP unit who conducted the project. And you can see he was going out to the market. This is, there was actually a PPP conference in November 2010. He attended and made a presentation. So did that, and that's just more information about the airport. So then they issued a request for qualifications. That was in July, almost a year later, July 2011. And in there, they wanted to know, in terms of the qualifications, do they have experience operating an airport? Transportation infrastructure. What about airline and passenger service? Do they have experience with that? Have they worked with government authorities? Financial qualification. Could they pay, this was going to be a concession, could they pay a large upfront fee to the government? This airport is busy, it generates a lot of revenue. Could they raise the financing? Back there, you asked that question. And could they make a commitment to a competitive price for this facility? So that's July 2011. They made a big announcement about it. They let the world know about this project. Here are questions. So not soon after they released this on July 5th, 2011, the RFQ. July 14th. Less than a week and a half later, they're starting to get questions. This was the very first question they received. And the question was, very interesting question. So whoever sent it, again, you notice it's anonymous. They don't identify who asked the question. But they said within the RFQ, it says that the contractor, the private party, will be required to finance, operate, maintain, and improve the airport. Okay. Well, they said, please clarify who will be responsible for the traffic control tower, the air traffic control tower, under the proposed concession, which is a reasonable question. They provided an answer, and they basically said the contractor, the private party, does not need to worry about the control tower. That's going to be provided by the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. There were additional questions. So these were always going out, making the market aware of the clarification. They had a rather lengthy, actually this is kind of a lengthy short list. They had, I think, 11 responses to the RFQ, 11 statements of qualifications. You can see Puerto Rico's down here in the Caribbean. They received responses from around the world for this project. From Zurich, from Germany, from India, together with South Korea. This is a group from, this is Australia, Mexico, and New York City. And this one was also from the United States of America. So they had a short list. They issued in October 2011. So this is the RFQ, feasibility, October 2011, the RFP. So about 4 months, about 3 months after they issued the RFQ. And here's the table of contents. Basically lays out what the process is going to be, what's required for them to submit for the RFP, the evaluation criteria, commercial closing, all that's in there. From that RFP, they actually then whittled it down to 2 more firms. They decide these 2 firms, these 2 groups, these are what you, in project finance, what we would refer to as special purpose vehicles, that these 2 were the technically the best qualified. And so they asked them now to essentially improve their financial proposals. So the short list was May 2012. They called it an indicative shortlist. We had an earlier shortlist. We have this special purpose vehicle, Aerostar, that's together with a Mexican firm who's the airport operator, a firm out of New York City which provide the money. And then here, GAA is a Spanish firm as the operator working. The money came from Australia. See how these things are very international. So that's in May of 2012. In July 2012, they made their decision. And they issued, the PPP unit issued a report on how they arrived at their decision, all the work that went into it, all the approvals that have been obtained. And they announced it, and it went to Aerostar, this firm right here. These folks won the project. The project was worth US $2.6 billion over, I think it's a 40-year concession. They paid, Aerostar paid the Puerto Rican government $610 million the day they took over the airport as an upfront fee to take over. And so that was in July 2012 selection. Now, there's a little bit more of the story. So it took essentially 2 years from the feasibility study to get to this commercial close. Well, a new government came in. And in Puerto Rico, I can tell you, having experienced it, elections can be blood sports. They basically, when the opposition party comes in, they ignore everything the previous party had done. And so now it was really called into question, after all this work, whether they were going to move forward with the project. The new government took power in January 2013. They came into power, and the deal still wasn't done. I called my friend David Alvarez, who's the director of the PPP unit, and I was surprised that he was still there, because usually everybody with the previous government gets swept out. But he was still in his office, and he's like, yeah, I'm still here. Well, even the new government realized this was too good a deal financially. So I think it was February 2013, they had the closing where the contract was signed. And in Puerto Rico, they know how to celebrate. So they had at the airport, they had a big signing ceremony. The new governor was there. They even had a band at the signing ceremony. All the TV cameras were there. It was a big deal, big celebration. The new governor from a party opposite of my friend, he congratulated my friend at the signing ceremony. My friend David Alvarez went from the signing ceremony back to his office, and he found all his personal belongings out in the hallway of his office, and the locks had been changed. He had been fired. They kept him long enough to get the money in, and that was it. He was out of there. Don't worry, he's gainfully employed. Having looked at how to manage public-private partnership tendering and procurements, my colleague Ned White will now take you through how we promote these public-private partnership bidding and investment opportunities. Ned will also examine some case studies in procurement.
How do you attract investors to come and say, we need much more investment? In fact, they needed billions and billions of dollars, not just a couple $100 million, but they needed billions of dollars over many years to finally address this power crisis. How do you attract investors to do that?
Through advertising or tender.
Well, you can advertise, you can say we're a great place to do business, but what do investors really want to see? Brochures and market shows and nice presentations? What is it that an investor really wants to see?
When it comes to the case of power,
Yeah.
they'll look at the market, where to sell is there any assurance of selling the electricity?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is there demand for it?
The demand for it.
But what do investors also look for? I said that they're like kondo, which means sheep, right?
Yeah.
So what are other investors really going to look at? Is it going to be the government's advertising, marketing, promotion? What?
How to get the financing from the
Well,
market, because they have their equity, but also they need the assurance of getting the financing.
sure. One of the things that we oftentimes find, financing is available, but what we need are prepared projects and opportunities. So what do you think investors are really, private power investors worldwide are really going to look to, say, investing in the Philippines? What are they going to look at?
The profit other investors are making.
Right. So in this case, what the government did is they said, yes, we probably could renegotiate the contract and we could step in and we could say, we're going to lower our payments to you. You don't need that money. Did they do that? No. They said, you keep your money. We are going to pass a BOT law. We'll create a BOT center. We've got model documents. We need billions of more dollars in investment. And the investors showed up. You had private power developers from Europe, from North America, from Japan, all coming into the Philippines and providing, in this case, $37 billion of investment in the power generation sector alone. And a big reason for that, you saw, when you get that much investor interest, you get competition. When you get competition, what happens to prices? Yes, they come down. So what I really want to stress in this example, it doesn't mean that you have to refrain from negotiating any contract. What it means, though, is you want to understand what investors will look for. And a lot of what they're going to look for is, are there other examples of PPPs here that you can show that work? Is it the international container terminal? Is it in the energy or the transport sector or others? That's really what they're going to look at. And so it's very important. So many have said that the additional amount that they ended up paying for power from this first project, which was very high risk project, 200 megawatt facility. The investor only put in $41 million. And if you know the power sector, you'd say, well, usually you'd expect a 200 megawatt plant to cost you about $200 million. But it was very high risk, could have lost it all. They had problems in the transport of the generating equipment and reassembling it. They had things that didn't work. So it was pretty high risk in the sense that they really could have stand to lose. They could have easily lost a lot more. It ended up succeeding. And the government basically said, you keep your money. Some have said that this was the best form of marketing and advertising that the government could have ever hoped for, being able to point to the success of this one project. So keep in mind that private investors and lenders will likely place more importance on the proven track record of PPPs that are already making money in Tanzania or wherever you're located in your sector than any other form of marketing and promotion that you can do. Okay, I will point out here, let me ask you a question. We have here in Tanzania and in most other countries a PPP law, and we've got regulations. Who do you think the law is more important for? Do investors, is that a key requirement for investors? I'll say before I invest in a PPP in Tanzania, I really need to know that you have a PPP law. Have there been any PPPs done before a PPP law has been passed?
Actually, the law is important for both parties, for the PPP or the investors and the public, because sometimes the investor, they need to know dialect. The countries have sufficiency market or environment for them to invest in. That's one. Second,
Okay.
for the public, that is important because it guides, it gives the elections, the procedures.
That gives procedures.
Yeah.
But in this case then, have there been any PPPs, pilot projects, that have happened before the act was in place and the unit? Yes. And one of the things that you will find when you ask investors, what is most important to you? Oftentimes, private investors or lenders will say, well, a PPP law is nice to have. It kind of clarifies things, but you don't have to have one. What you do have to have is an enforceable contract. As long as my contract with the off-taker, with the government, et cetera, is in place and enforceable, that's fine. It doesn't have to be a PPP law. There have been many pilot PPPs that have been done before a PPP law. What you'll find is that usually a PPP law and its regulations is more important within the public sector because it assures public sector stakeholders that what you're doing in a PPP is legal, the procedures are clear, you know how it gets reviewed and approved, et cetera. It clarifies the decision making. But what is most important when we're trying to look at PPPs from the perspective of our private sector partners, what's really important to them? And as I said, what's important to them is they would love to see, is somebody already here making money doing the same thing? If so, then they tend to crowd in and you'll get the benefits of competition and lower prices. If not, if you are working on the first one, understand why it is that they're cautious. Oftentimes they'll say, well, how come nobody else has yet done a bus terminal? Is there something, is this inherently risky? Are there many unknowns? If so, I need a lot more sharing of these risks and understanding that I'm taking more risk and I'll require a higher return for it. And then the second thing I want to point out is that what's really important to the private developer, your private partner, is going to be, is the contract enforceable? That's what's most important. Having a PPP law, that's a nice way of saying that we've got clear procedures for how contracts will be reviewed and approved, et cetera, but it's not an essential requirement for private developers. It's nice to have. Okay, you can also do this, as we've seen, through things like investment roadshows. You can work with things like investor conferences. John has mentioned that. It's a good way of getting the word out there. Again, usually working with transaction advisors. They can help you in structuring these things. You can even, a number of OECD countries, if these are projects large enough, say requiring foreign investment, you can find that the commercial offices and foreign embassies here can oftentimes be useful in supporting some of that, especially if they think that there's opportunities for their firms, contractors, or equipment suppliers to participate, such as in international roadshows. John also mentioned that a good way to start, especially if you're doing the first set of PPP projects, is beginning a tendering process with a request for expressions of interest. And just as a review, what is a reason for having a request for expressions of interest? It's not a request for qualification. It's not a request for proposal, but it's basically saying, If you're interested in this PPP project that's forthcoming, just send us a one-line email or reply that says, yes, we're interested. What's a good reason for that?
The identification of potential investor that might be interested so that you know the...
Yes.
Yeah.
You would like to know ahead of time, do we actually have a large level of interest? Because if we're about to start a time-consuming, expensive, and important tender process, and we go out with an request for expressions of interest, and we find that we only get 3 or 4 firms being interested, then we might say, we've got a fundamental problem here. For some reason, maybe they believe it's too high risk. Maybe they just don't know about PPPs. Maybe there's something we need to fix. But better to find that out now, early on, rather than wait when we release an RFP and maybe we only get 1 bid or no bids. Okay, on the downside, it can take more time. I know I've worked with contracting authorities before who are in a hurry to start the tender process, and so they say, Ned, write the RFP and let's release it. And I will say, well, let's first find out if there's market interest. No, that takes too much time. We need to go. Let's hurry. So on the downside, it can add an additional couple weeks to the process, but I think a good thing is I like to know, and I think any other transaction advisor as well, is there going to be sufficient interest in what we're doing? Because the worst thing that can happen by the time you've spent all the time and money to get to the tendering process, an outcome that you want to avoid is you go out releasing a tender and nobody's interested. That's disappointing. Again, a request for expressions of interest, very brief. Another way, well, here's another question for you. Let's say you do have a list of 20 potential bidders who say, yeah, we're interested in this. Tell us, what's the project about? In the request for EOI, you just provided a 2-paragraph description of the project, but we want to know what the project's about. How big is it? How long? What is the term of the contract? What are you asking us to do? How do you give them that information? Do you basically say, well, here's the feasibility study, and here's the financial model, and here's the... How do you tell bidders in a summary form about your project? Do you think that bidders, any interested party, potential bidder, wants to read through the entire feasibility study, which sometimes has technical and environmental and, I don't know, social impact statements? Do potential bidders want to read through all that information?
Yeah, you just have to give the project description, a summary of the project description.
So we need to give them some project description. What if these are investors who maybe they're not as familiar with Tanzania? Maybe they're a foreign investor not that familiar with Tanzania, or not familiar with how the sector is structured or the project. So the answer, what we want to give them, is called an information memorandum. So what is this? Well, a project information memorandum, it's a summary of the most relevant information about the project that should be able to be read and digested in one sitting. So it's usually 30 to 70 pages long, maximum. And it's also meant to be read by, say, a non-technical specialist. With many investors and potential bidders, people who manage money, they are constantly being offered investment opportunities. They're being told, well, there's a real estate project in this area. There's a tourism project over here. There's a transport project there. And some of them may say, okay, I'll look at it, but I can't spend too much time evaluating it. Give me something that I can read in one sitting, and give me something that explains basically what the whole structure is about. What the whole structure is, so that I can decide, do I now want to pursue the opportunity and even hire people to help me prepare my bid, partner with firms? Do I really want to spend more money doing this, or do I want to pass on it? And that's what an information memorandum is designed to do. So unlike full feasibility studies, which go into great technical detail, an information memorandum summarizes this in just 30 to 70 pages, meant to be read in about one sitting. Typically, you'd find that what it would have is an introduction, basically going to explain in about 2 pages what is the project, what's the rationale for it. Yes?
How does this differ with the concept note?
The concept note occurs before, that's in the pre-feasibility study phase. We've identified a project, here's what we think it is, here's the available information, but we don't know the size of it. Maybe we haven't determined the size of it yet, the output standards, how the risks would be allocated. So this is, and the purpose of a concept note really is to decide, should we do a feasibility study or not? When we've done the feasibility study, and now we've actually prepared a business case. So we're not only asking, is the project feasible, but what will it look like? How will the risks be structured? The allocation of risks. What will the output standards be? Now we want to give this to potential investors and say, this is what the project is about. You can read this, and this provides the essential information. And then if you're interested in it, you can probably get more information, such as John mentioned, say during a data room, but you can really take a deep dive into the technical detail, which you're probably not going to do yourself because you're the decision maker. You're going to hire specialists to, you're going to appoint the specialists who work for you to get into these details. But it should say not just here is the conceptual idea of a project, but here for this project, here's a site has been identified. We've identified that the terminal, a new terminal facility would need to handle X number of passengers or buses or about this amount of space. It may even include some rough estimates on some of the input costs, provide an idea. But now an investor, instead of saying, well, you're only giving me a concept, like we need a bus terminal in this city, and you could say, but there's so many unknowns there, to now saying, we've studied it, and here is the required output standards of the project. Now, and here's where your revenue streams can come from. And here's how much is currently being paid, et cetera. So they can make a more informed decision. Okay, so typically it would include things, as I said, an introduction, background information on the economy and how the sector is regulated, background on Tanzania's PPP program. What does the law say? What is the procedures for reviewing, approving, signing PPP contracts, et cetera? And then especially about the specific project. And then you can include annexes as well. What I've oftentimes seen in the annexes is here's where you put the proposed output standards. Might go into a bit more detail, but can be helpful to provide. I'll give you an example of an info memo. This comes from a PPP project from Egypt. John had mentioned a number of times about PPPs for schools. Let's say you had a PPP where the private partner, and oftentimes in schools, these are done on availability payment basis. So the private partner designs and finances schools, builds them, and maintains them for 15 to 20 years, receives availability payments from the Ministry of Education or whoever the education authority is, and actually the teaching of students, the curriculum, the teachers, the administrators, that's all the public education system. So Egypt looked at this, and here you'll see that they prepared an info memo. And one of the things that's important on any info memo is who wrote it. And for large projects, sometimes usually it's the transaction advisor. So the transaction advisor is going to do it. Sometimes for large projects, they will actually hire an outside independent party, typically a financial manager, sometimes an investment manager, such as a bank or a financial institution, because what they want to do is they want to say, we want to have something written for investors by another investor. We don't want necessarily marketing or advertising done by somebody whose job is who may not really understand PPPs or isn't an investor, but is going to paint a really rosy picture. It's sort of, no, this isn't the opportunity for propaganda. What they want is, I want somebody who knows what an investor needs to know writing this, and I'm actually going to pay them a fair amount of money so they have a nice logo on the cover that says this was written by a firm that does this, and you can say, oh, interesting. They've got a pretty decent record. This actually means something. If they say this, I can pretty well trust their judgment. Of course, there's going to be a disclaimer in every info memo, and the disclaimer is going to say none of the information in here, we don't vouch for its accuracy, or you cannot, if any of the information changes, essentially we are held harmless. This is only for information purposes, but it's not binding. But it means a lot. This is what you hand out to investors at road shows when you've got a serious investor. You can say, here you go. Written by a reputable investment manager, describes the whole project, everything you need to know. I'll say, great, I'll look at it. So here's a look at Egypt's PPP pipeline going back to 2007, 2008. You can see that they were looking for a number of projects in the social infrastructure sector, like schools and hospitals, as well as in the wastewater sector. They planned to do the schools PPPs. I think they planned to initially do, what was it, over, well, a couple thousand schools. The first batch was going to be about 300 schools in this case. And so this is an info memo for that. You'll see another thing that's typically in an info memo. What is the proposed timeline for procurement? Here's the info memo, but we're going to begin the RFQ stage at this date. And here's what our target time frame is. You'll see their planned time frame for the chronology. And the first batch was, it changed a bit. Initially, I think it changed from 345 to 300 schools. But again, what they wanted to do and what they invested heavily in was, instead of taking all 3,000 schools at once, let's take the first batch of them, let's issue this, let's work hard to get the model right, let's get this one successful, because if the first one is successful, you'll find that others will come in and follow suit. And it'll get easier to do the subsequent ones, and hopefully the prices will come down as the risks come down. So here they were, the schools divided up around the country. Here you'll see the contents of the info memo. Again, it's pretty standard in this case. Here you'll see that, oh, sorry, I had it here. Number of schools, the first group of 300 schools, you'll see that it was spread out between basic schools, primary, preparatory, secondary, even industrial and vocational schools, so covering a broad range there. It also pointed out that relevant data, if you wanted to know data on the sites, et cetera, this was what the virtual data room was for. Investors, if once they decide they want to go after the project, then they're going to say, okay, let's study each potential site, let's gather information. But they don't necessarily want all of that up front in an info memo. So, some discussion questions here. Which PPP bid promotion techniques do you think would be most appropriate for your projects and your organization?
It depends on which kind of the project are you doing.
Mm-hmm.
So it may be newspapers. You can use that to promote
Mm-hmm.
the bids. Or it also may be journals, or even in the trade fairs and exhibitions.
Okay.
All those ways you can do it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you think that's most effective, at least in your case, that the best way to attract interest from the best bidders is, say, media advertising? Or do you think, what do you think for the potential private partners that you would know? What do you think that they really are interested in?
To my case, I think the media, radios, TVs,
Mm-hmm.
can be much better for the promotion of the PPP.
Okay.
Because it's a real new thing in our country. So we need this information to be widely known to everybody in the communities, in the investors and whoever. So using televisions, radio stations can be much better for the promotion
Okay.
at the beginning. Yeah.
What else? Yeah.
To run on social media and investment portals
Okay.
that could reach a specific target market for
Okay.
that case.
Let me at least say one thing, which is that there's a reason we'll oftentimes call PPP projects single-purpose project companies. That when we create the project company or that SPV, we sometimes refer to it as the single-purpose project company. That when investors invest in it, when lenders lend to it, when the government awards a contract to it, it is for that one project and that one purpose. And that sometimes if you were to link it to other things and say, well, you're generating electricity, but there's also another deal where you're extracting natural resources or you're involved in other lines of business, that's very difficult. And oftentimes you'd find investors or lenders to say, no, 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 we're going to ring fence this, if you will, so that all the contracts, all the investment are for one project purpose. Okay. And what I'd like to do now to help us prepare is I want to go through, as a group, a multiple choice and true-false test. And if you can answer these questions, you'll probably do very well on the online test. So, question number 1. A good PPP for the public sector is one that makes the private party, is it A, assume all project risks, B, pay the highest revenue sharing with the public sector, C, solve the stakeholder management issues, or D, assume risks that it is best positioned to handle? What is the answer? D. Sorry? D. Correct. It is D. Assume the risks that it's best positioned to handle. We've said before that you have to allocate risks. You don't allocate risks to a party that can't handle them well. If you do, you won't get good value for money. All right, number 2. All of the following are true for PPPs except A, they should be affordable for users. B, they should be affordable for the public contracting authority. C, they should provide the lowest construction cost. Or D, they should provide value for money. What's the answer? C. What's the answer? C. Some say it's C. So you think a PPP, the best one is that it provides the lowest construction cost?
Except.
Correct. Okay, number 3, seeing if you're paying attention. Which is not an example of an end user fee for a concession contract for a bus terminal PPP? Is it A, the entry fees charged to each dollar that enters the facility? Is it B, the rents paid by shop owners at the terminal building?
No.
Is it C, advertising fees?
No.
Or is it D, availability payments by the local government authority to the private concessionaire?
It is D.
Correct, it is D. That is not an end user fee, it's an availability payment. All righty. Number 4, which of these would typically be structured as an availability payment PPP? Is it A, a bus terminal, B, a marketplace, C, school facilities, or D, an abattoir?
C.
Correct, C, school facilities. Very good. Okay, number 5. Please complete the following sentence. The purpose of identifying and selecting candidate PPPs is A, to determine if a feasibility study should be done. B, to promise that the PPP contract will be signed and the project will reach financial closure. C, to manage stakeholders. Or D, to calculate the financial viability of the candidate PPP project.
A.
Correct. Wow, you're batting, sorry, you're, what is it, 5 for 5. Okay, very good. Okay, number 6 is going to be simpler. It's a true-false question. Before conducting the project identification and selection activity, a technical study of all the project's cost, technical design options, and benefits delivered must be completed. True or false?
False.
That's right, it's false. That's what the feasibility study is for. When we identify a project, it's based on whatever limited information we currently have. All right, number 7, which of the following is the most important criteria for the identification and selection of a candidate PPP project? Is it A, the size of the new private investments needed? Is it B, that it's an unsolicited proposal from an interested private investor? Is it C, that it's a priority project for the public sector? Or is it D, the forecasted level of revenues the private partner will share with government?
C.
C, correct again. All right. Tell you what, don't answer quite so quickly. Let the other folks guess here a little bit. I'll ask you later. You have to just give them a chance first. All right. What is the difference between a concession and a BOT? Again, you want to define your terms, but in this case, that a BOT means availability payments. The difference between end user fees or availability payments from a public contracting authority. 11, the reason why governments should pursue PPPs is to access new private financing. True or false? Is that the only reason to do PPPs? And probably more important, well, here's a challenge as well. Private financing can be a lot more expensive. So in this case, in the context of this test, they want to say that that's not the only reason you do it. It's really for better long-term value for money. I do want to point out that the wording in this test, there's a few cases where I think it's confusing. So I want to alert you ahead of time to what they mean. There's a few cases where they use the wrong term, so I'll give you a heads up on that. Number 12. Yes, go ahead.
Let me take back you to number 10. I'm not so much clear about the difference between a concession and a BOT. I'm not very much comfortable with this. Maybe
Sure.
if you can clarify more.
In this case, you want to make sure when they say BOT, they were meaning availability payments, the single offtake.
Okay.
Okay, number 12. Who should decide on the inputs to a PPP project, i.e. the technology, design, construction materials, maintenance? Private partner, okay, very good. Number 13, which risk would a private operator find the most difficult to manage in a PPP for the design, financing, construction, and operation of a municipal bus terminal? Is it A, the design risk? Is it B, the market demand or traffic risk? Is it C, construction cost risk, D, completion risk, or E, availability risk? B. Yes, market demand or traffic risk. Okay, good. An effective PPP feasibility study should select the best answer. A, confirm that a technical solution is available. B, describe the different PPP modalities that could be used for the project. C, include a large and sophisticated PPP financial model. D, recommend in detail the financial, legal, and technical business case for the PPP. Or E, list the inputs that the private partner should be required to make in the PPP project. What is the answer? D. D, yes. You don't simply say, yes, technically the project could be done. You say, here's how it should look. Here's how the risks should be allocated, specifically. Number 15, the outputs performance standards that a PPP project should meet. A, should be drafted as part of the feasibility study. B, should be drafted by the LGA's PPP contract manager after you sign the contract. C, should be drafted by the private partner based on the level of service they want to provide. Or D, should be drafted by the PPP technical and engineering specialist. What is the answer? You say B? Do you come up with the output standards after you sign the contract? No. Do you leave it up to the private partner to say, you draft them? No. So what's the answer? A, yes. PPPs are defined in terms of outputs. You do that during the feasibility study. Number 16, for a BOT project that is financed on a limited recourse project finance basis, which party borrows the funds from lenders? Is it A, the government through its Ministry of Finance? Is it B, each of the private firms that own shares in the new PPP project company? Is it C, the new project company, also known as the special purpose vehicle? Or is it D, the private construction contractor? Do you remember some of the examples that we showed from the case studies, the waste management sector, the exercise yesterday on from Kyrgyzstan? Who borrows the money? Okay, here's a question. Is it A? Is it that the government borrows the money? No, okay, you're correct. Is it B, each of the private firms that owns shares in this thing called the project company? Correct, it's not them. Is it C, the project company itself, also known as the SPV? Yes. Yes. That's what we mean when we say it is limited recourse project finance. Okay, good. Number 17. What is one of the main attractions of project financing of infrastructure for governments? Is it A, lower interest rates? Is it B, low leverage? Is it C, lenders do not have to be repaid? Or is it D, the government doesn't need to provide a sovereign guarantee to the lenders?
D.
Correct, it is D. This is what we mean that it's not sovereign financing. It's not the government that is borrowing the money or providing a sovereign guarantee. It's the private firm, also known as the SPV, which means you should get better value for money if their capital is at risk. They're going to manage the project well to ensure that they're able to perform as well as repay all lenders. Number 18, why do equity investors require a higher rate of return on their investment than lenders do? Is it A, because there's less equity in PPP projects than there is debt? Is it B, they do not require a higher rate of return? Is it C, because lenders are more efficient than equity investors? Or is it D, because equity investors accept more risk than lenders do? Say again? D. Correct. It is D. If you're an equity investor, you get paid last. When money comes into the project company, first you have to pay your operating costs, your staff, and your suppliers. Next, you pay lenders. And then if there's any money left over, that can go to the equity investor. They take the risk of waiting to get paid last, so they have more risk. Number 19, which of the following is an example of public sector risk sharing in a PPP project that enhances the creditworthiness for lenders? Is it A, the waterfall model of project cash flows? Is it B, PPP tendering and procurement? Is it C, public sector comparator analysis? Or is it D, providing a minimum occupancy guarantee for a public housing PPP? Which is an example of risk sharing? Correct, it is D. The others are not really even forms of risk sharing at all. They just refer to other parts of the analysis of a PPP. Number 20, what is the most important reason to conduct shortlisting and pre-qualification of bidders for PPPs instead of allowing full and open competitive tendering bidding? Is it A, to collect more money from interested bidders who purchase the request for qualifications? Is it B, to increase the number of local firms that participate in the procurement? Is it C, to improve the quality of bids that are submitted from experienced and serious PPP bidders? Or is it D, to separate the evaluation of bidders' experience from the evaluation of the technical and cost proposals? C, correct. All right. Number 21, what is the best reason for a PPP unit to begin a tendering process by issuing a request for expressions of interest? Should know this one. Is it A, to determine early on in the procurement process if there is sufficient level of interest amongst private firms in bidding for this PPP project? Is it B, to determine which private bidder is offering the lowest price? C, to review the technical inputs, including technology, design, construction materials, equipment sourcing, and staffing the bidder will use? Or is it D, to pre-qualify to bid all firms that have responded to the request for expression of interest? It is A. Yep, we've discussed that. Good. All right, 22, which of the following statements is true about the amount of time and resources to required to complete a competitive tendering for a PPP project? Is it A, PPP procurements generally take too long to complete and this should be reduced? Is it B, rigorous due diligence during the tendering process is required by governments and private bidders to deliver the best value for money, which takes time and resources? Is it C, experienced PPP transaction advisors can pay the higher costs of PPP procurements? Or is it D, value for money benefits can be increased by directly awarding PPP contracts sooner and deciding on risk allocations afterwards? What is the answer? Is it, okay, here's it. Is it A, that procurements take too long and this should be reduced? Well, many complain they do take too long. But why do they take so long? Say again? Rigorous due diligence, spoken by from our lawyer here. Yes, that is the answer. You need to do rigorous due diligence, meaning you have to make sure that all risks are identified and allocated. You have to make sure that all of the output standards are clear and measurable and unambiguous. And it is through this process of spending more time and money preparing the project in better detail that you're going to get a project that should perform as it's planned to. We're not going to have the typical risks of deferred maintenance or being overbuilt or underbuilt or other problems that face us. Okay, number 23, which of the following is true about the management of unsolicited proposals for PPPs? Is it A, PPP contracts from unsolicited proposals are generally more likely to be renegotiated or canceled as compared to PPPs awarded through competitive tendering? Is it B, a good reason for governments to accept unsolicited proposals is to avoid having to spend their own money on feasibility studies? Is it C, private proposers are generally attracted to the idea of having their project proposal costs reimbursed or being awarded bonus points during a Swiss challenge? Or is it D, unsolicited proposals should not be awarded for projects that are already included in the public sector's development plans? We didn't talk too much about this, but I think you know enough to be able to make a good guess. You say it's A. You are correct. The answer is A. One of the things that we find is that when an unsolicited, in many cases, not all, but when unsolicited proposals are provided, we say that the level of due diligence and rigorous analysis and preparation is less. And in some cases, I've seen they say, we'll sign the contract now, we'll proceed with the project, we'll figure out the detailed risk allocation later on. Let's get this going. And later on, you run into problems, you run into risks that occur, and we find that unsolicited proposals have a higher frequency of either being renegotiated, usually at the expense of the public sector, or even being canceled, oftentimes with charges of lack of transparency. There's something else going on that led to this award. It's not a fair deal. Okay, number 24. These are not multiple choice questions. but I want you to be familiar with them, be able to answer them. Number 24, can all infrastructure and public services projects be done through PPPs? No. Correct. No, they can't. It's only suitable for some. Number 25, in PPP projects, do private partners select their own design? Now here, I'm careful on this one. I think they use the wrong term in the test itself. I think they use the wrong term. Whenever anybody mentions the term cheap, that usually means that's the negative side of being low cost, if something is cheap. In this case, I think they misused it. The question they say, in PPP projects, do private partners select their own design, construction methods, and materials in order to achieve the cheapest operating and maintenance costs over the whole life of the project? I got this question wrong because I read it literally and said, well, there's the old expression, cheap is expensive, right? If you have a cheap input now, you're going to pay for it later on. What they meant to say here was to have sort of the lowest or most reliable O&M costs over the whole life. When you see this question, understand that they used the wrong word cheap. They should have used sort of the best or most efficient O&M costs. So, yeah, I would correct that test. But just when you see that, the important point here is they're basically saying, do they choose the inputs in order to provide the most efficient operations over the whole life of the project? So don't be tripped up by that. Second one here is that they have a question on economic analysis versus financial analysis. Sometimes I see people put those two together. They'll say, in the economic and financial analysis, it shows this. There's a difference between economic and financial viability here, in this case. And they say here that credit enhancements and public sector risk sharing, like the public sector contributing funding or whatever, to support will support financial viability, but it doesn't change the economic viability of the project. And in this case, that is true. Basically, financial analysis, as you know it, just counts the cash costs and benefits. Economic is sort of indifferent between where the financing is coming from. So don't be confused by that question. Number 27, cost overruns in a PPP project are usually supported by the public partner. True or false? True or false? Cost overruns are usually supported by the public partner. Is that true or false? False. Right. Number 28, just want you to be familiar with currency exchange risk. That basically means what if the currency in which the revenues are denominated, say, depreciates against the currency in which the investment is made or the debt is provided. So it affects a PPP project. Sometimes you'll oftentimes have, especially for larger projects with foreign financing, currency exchange risk will be allocated to the government. Okay, number 29. Question?
In this particular question, do they need us to define the term currency exchange rate risk, or they want us to identify who's this risk goes to?
They just want to know, does currency exchange risk affect the bankability of a project for a private investor? And the answer would be yes, if you were subject to it. And if you can't manage that risk, that's why it would be allocated to government. Okay, 29, for larger PPP projects requiring new project financing, approximately how many bidders should be qualified to submit bids? Here they'll ask you for a range of numbers. Should you pre-qualify 1 or 2? Should it be 10 to 15?
The best option is 6.
Yes, you're right. Value for money, it's composed of those two components. But when you do value for money comparison, you're comparing the public versus the private sector solutions. Which one offers the better value for money? Okay, there was a typo in the test. In the test, they talk about arbitrage. Can anybody tell me what is the difference, maybe our lawyer can, what's the difference between arbitration, and then maybe we'll know what arbitrage is, but what is arbitration? Can you enlighten us on arbitration?
Well, from my understanding, I understand one term, which is arbitration,
Yeah.
of which stands for the one-amended dispute-solving mechanism, of which there will be two parties, the conflicting parties, and also the middleman who will facilitate the arbitration or the solving of that particular dispute.
Yes. Tomorrow, when we talk about contract management and performance monitoring, John will be talking with us about arbitration as an effective, efficient, can even be confidential, quick way of solving a dispute. Anytime you get a large project over a long period of time, lots of different stakeholders and lots of money, it's normal that you'll expect that there'll be some disputes because the consequences of the dispute are costly. One party will say, we think we did. The other party will say, we think you didn't. Got to find a way to solve it. Arbitration is a way, as they'd mentioned, you appoint sort of an independent arbitrator. That is arbitration. Arbitrage is something different. Arbitrage actually refers to a financial trading mechanism where if you can lock in a trade where you can say, I can have a risk-free money-making mechanism where I can say I will, at the same time that I buy a product or a commodity at a low price, I lock in with a contract to sell it at a higher price. That's called arbitrage. And there are traders and who seek these opportunities, these sort of market imperfections, and they'll borrow lots and lots of money to not do it in small scale but huge scale. That's arbitrage. In the test, they say arbitrage, but they mean arbitration. Again, that's an error in the test. Arbitration is a dispute resolution mechanism. Okay, number 33. When should a PPP contract monitoring unit, so we'll talk about this tomorrow, but we've said that when you sign a PPP contract, the public partner has to monitor the performance, and that could be through an individual or some institutional structure. You've got to have some procedures where you're constantly doing this. You could call it, for a large project, there might be a unit. When should it first be designed? A, it should be designed after the project construction is completed and it begins to deliver services. B, it should be designed when the project has reached financial closure and construction has begun. C, an outline of the design of the CMU and its basic functions should be included in the PPP feasibility study. Or is it D, it should be designed after the contract between the municipality and the private partner has been signed? You are correct. It is C. Again, it's sort of like saying, if you're going to play a football match, when does the referee's job begin? When does the referee's job begin? Does it start when he blows the whistle? Or she? It starts even before time begins. In fact, you say that by the time you reach commercial closure, you sign a contract, you should have that unit up and running because the clock is ticking. There's obligations on either side to perform. So you need to have it up and running, and you need to know during even the feasibility study, we should have a plan to monitor this contract. We may not have all the details worked out, but that's something that the public contracting authority has to be prepared to do. Number 34, just a couple more left. How should the costs of the PPP contract monitoring unit be paid for? So we said before that it's going to take some resources to monitor contract. A common mistake that I've seen some contracting authorities do is they rush to reach closure on their contract, and then someone says, well, how are we going to monitor this? They'll say, oh, we didn't think about that. Tell you what, let's take somebody smart like the chief engineer, and let's just give them the contract and say, you monitor it. And the engineer will say, okay, do I have a budget? And you say, well, no, we didn't think about that. There's no additional budget for it. Can I hire staff? No. Do I have any resources? sorry, that you oftentimes get that person saying, well, look, I'll assume everything's going fine. It's sort of like the referee saying, look, you fellas know how to play the game of football, okay? I'm going to be across the street at my other job. You guys just, I assume everything will go fine here, okay? Right. Doesn't work that way. So, number 34, how should the costs be paid for? They should be added to the costs of the government's general budget. B, they should be covered through new concession fee payments from the private partner to the government. C, they should be deducted from the availability payments made to the private partner. Or D, they should be added to the operating costs of the private partner. What do you think makes most sense? It's actually going to be B. The principle to follow here is that the project itself should cover the costs of monitoring it. So if there are concession fee payments or revenue sharing, the first thing that revenue share should go to is be able to monitor the project itself. The problem is that if you just add it to the government's general budget, what I've sometimes seen is that cost gets cut. The monitoring doesn't happen. So principle to follow as we see, pay for the cost of monitoring through the project structure itself. So we say like the project pays for itself. That's the principle that we follow. Okay, I think these are the last ones. 36, which of the following is a recommended function of a PPP contract monitoring unit? Is it A, manage and coordinate the completion of the PPP feasibility study? Is it B, provide the technical design for the new facility? Is it C, audit and verify the performance reporting data from the private partner? Or is it D, evaluate the proposals submitted by private bidders and select the winning bidder? C, yes. Your job is to audit and verify the reporting data from your private partner. There are other functions that you do as well, but that's one of the key ones. And then, which is the correct sequence of PPP contract dispute resolution techniques? Is it A, first litigation, then communication, termination, and arbitration? Is it B, communication, mediation, arbitration, litigation? Is it C, mediation, arbitration, consultation, litigation? Or is it D, arbitration, mediation, litigation, termination? Correct, it is B. I think you know this well. Okay. Last group of questions, just to make sure that we're familiar with it. Want to make sure you're all prepared. Keep in mind that governments monitor PPP performance. They do not pay for input costs. Make sense? Okay, you'll see some questions like that are worded that way. Next one, litigation in the courts is not the only way to resolve PPP disputes. Okay, that's pretty obvious. Third, low traffic for a PPP project does not always impact the private partner. You'll see a question on this. Again, it says often governments will provide minimum or support minimum traffic guarantees. So just because there is low demand doesn't necessarily mean it affects the private partner. It depends how the risks are allocated. Let's see, next, during tendering, a minimum level of interaction between the public authority and private bidders is needed to ensure transparency and fairness. There's a question about this. That is true. You want to make sure that all interactions are public. We have what we call no ex parte communications. So it shouldn't necessarily be the case that the contracting authorities, party and the bidder, a bidding group gets together and they sort of have secret talks that nobody knows what went on in that. That's called ex parte communications. That you don't want that. That's against the principles of transparency and fairness. Let's see, fifth here. Higher borrowing and financial leverage does produce cheaper total costs of financing. We'll say that one of the reasons why we expect that infrastructure projects are leveraged, why do we borrow money to finance infrastructure projects? Why not just fund it all with our own equity? Well, we can borrow a lot of money from lenders and pay them a lower rate. It means that the total costs of financing are going to be cheaper than if we just did everything with equity. It's the beauty, as we say, of using OPM. Anybody know what OPM stands for? Other people's money. Yes. If you borrow money from other people and pay them a lower rate, it means that the returns on your investment are going to be much higher. So this is why what we call the beauty of financial leverage. This is why, again, if you can make capital loans available to lenders, you can get a lot more built. If you just simply say, nope, you have to finance everything with your own equity, very limited. But that's the principle, as we say, other people's money. So there is a question here that says higher borrowing, meaning financial leverage. Financial leverage means I put in, Donald Trump, a little bit of my own money, and I borrow a lot of other people's money to do it. That means lower costs of financing overall. Okay. Second to last here. Refinancing a project after construction is completed is lower risk and therefore cheaper, meaning offering lower interest rates. When we reach financial closure on a project, once we've reached that point, does the project have more risk or less risk compared to, say, 2 years later when the construction is built? Which is higher risk? When are the risks in the project higher? When the financial closure is reached or when the construction is finished? Yeah, you got all this money tied up. You haven't finished construction yet. There could be delays. There could be cost overruns, et cetera. Once you've finished construction, you'll say, well, some of the risks are out of the way. So sometimes what you see is that after construction is finished, you refinance the project. And lenders, investors would say, the construction is finished, so the risk is lower, so our interest rates will be lower. So that is something that happens. I want you to just understand that here. Refinancing a project after construction is completed is lower risk, therefore offering lower interest rates. Yeah?
About the OPM,
Okay.
when it comes to use other people's money. You say it's a bit less risky when you use other people's money, but
What I'm saying, it's lower cost of financing.
Lower cost, yes.
Yeah, so when you allow leverage, you can say that you can source lower cost of financing. It means that the total prices in the project, the tariffs or the revenue requirement will be lower.
But how it comes to the one who took the loan? Because let's say 30% is the equity and 70% is the loan.
Yep.
And we say to the perspective of the investor, it's cheaper taking other people's money
Yeah.
at lower cost. But as far as I know, if you lose that money, they will take your asset, sell your asset. So I don't know how come it's cheaper.
In that case, though, what it means is if the lender is not repaid, they can take over the project if it's a project financing, but they don't have recourse to other assets. And what I would say is that the reason that lenders will accept a lower interest rate compared to equity is that they take less risk. The loan agreement says you will get paid before the equity investor, so you're taking lower risk. Your interest rate will be lower than the rate of return on equity. Anyway, the principle here is that if you allow projects to be financed with debt, you're going to end up with cheaper total costs of financing compared to if you required it all to be equity. Okay, lastly, the project's IRR should be above the investor's weighted average cost of capital to offer a positive net present value. Now that you're familiar with some of the techniques of managing PPP tendering and procurement, as well as how to market and promote PPP investment opportunities, you can test your knowledge by taking the short test. Please answer each question either true or false. You can also test your knowledge on PPP procurement and tendering by participating in the following group exercise, led by my colleague John Budarazzi. Please listen to the background information and instructions on the exercise. Then you can pause the video, come up with your own answers, and compare them with the answers that other groups provided to the same assignment.
Your job here is to eventually shortlist 3 firms. We're going to take this through the request for qualifications stage. So why don't we just walk it through? We have a bus terminal. Here's a description of the project. You have that. So you have a description. One of the things you're going to have to do is we're going to get qualifications in. We've issued a request for qualifications, and it's in fact a little bit more than simply a request for qualifications. We asked them to do a little more, you'll see. So they have a transmittal letter, that's essentially the cover letter. There's certain criteria in this where they must pass. They must be able to meet these criteria to move forward. So they must be able to obtain a performance bond. We haven't talked about this much, but what a performance bond is just that. It's basically the private party. They purchase a bond, which is essentially a bond you can think of almost as a loan, but it's a security that if somehow they fail to perform, they fail to do what the bond is insuring them against, they forfeit the bond, the premium they paid for the bond, and now they're out the money. So they have to come up with a performance bond. The proposer, excuse me, has not been disqualified, removed, debarred, suspended from performing or bidding on government work. This proposal team has to have all these various skills: planning, engineering, construction, operations and maintenance, each of them having at least 15 years of experience. And the proposer must have the financial capability to execute the project. Okay? I've provided you weighting here. So we have, there's really 3 weights. One is qualification and experience is going to be 65%. The other is how they decide how they're going to approach the technical solution. That's 25% of the weight. And lastly, there's the safety qualifications, safety qualifications, yes, 10%, what their safety record is. I'll show you how these actually work in a moment. And in here, under these headings of project qualifications, technical approach, safety qualifications, you'll see there's subcategories. So we have, I think it's 5. You received 5 firms have submitted their qualifications. The first one is AJM. AJM, the first initials of my 3 children, Alice, Jack, and Mary. All right? And you'll see for each one we go through, you will have this pass-fail grid. Within your groups, one of the things you will do is take a look and how you're going to score them, whether they passed or failed that criteria. Here are the various criteria, and here's what they submitted with their proposal, with their qualifications, okay? So we have AJM. Then you're going to have some evaluation criteria. And in the evaluation criteria, this is where you actually give them a score. The score, importantly, remember this, when you do the scoring, for instance, it'll say, do they have experience with similar projects? And it says, you'll see in parentheses, 30 points. That means when you score them, they can get no higher than 30. You can give them a 0, 5, 10, 17, whatever the number is you want, but it can only go as high as 30. Similarly, when we're down here, understanding of risk, they only can get up to 10 points. So same thing, can't be more than 10. The total, well, you would just add all these up and you'd get a total. All right? So you have that. You will have this for each proposal as well. So we have a pass-fail scoring matrix. In the pass-fail, you won't see the instructions here. You give them a 1 if they pass. They get a 0 if they fail. Okay? 1 if they pass, 0 if they fail. So you'll have the evaluation criteria. Here's our second proposer, Gargantuan. Same thing you can see. They have your basic pass-fail criteria, and here's the evaluation criteria. The next one is Ned White Development Limited. There's Ned White without facial hair. So you have that. Same thing. Oh, there he is. Who's that good-looking guy? They, same thing for this guy. We have Acme. Same thing. You would go through and take a look at that, and that's it. Those are the 5. What your job is to figure out who are going to be the 3 on the short list. Okay? So, very simple. If you went up to Acme, you would have a score for pass-fail. You'd add all these up. Okay? You put it here, and you'd have a score for Acme for their evaluation criteria, which would be down here, and you would just put it here. And then you take a look, and it's up to you to figure out who the 3 are that would advance to the RFP. Now, the other part of this exercise is you will have an opportunity at some point, study the different proposals. Take about maybe no more than half an hour looking at the different proposals. You don't need to score them at this point. After that half hour, one of the things that you sometimes do in procurement, you would interview those that make the submissions, the respondents. You're going to have an opportunity to interview those 5 teams. I will play 5 different characters. So if you have questions, on what they submitted or what they say they can do or will do or what they need from you, you ask questions, okay? And that'll be for all of you, okay? And then after the questioning is done, I want you to then go back and start scoring the 5 proposals.
On their financial capacity, the government was very clear that the proposer has to be financially sound. He's able to finance. But according to AJM, they say they are financially sound. So I'm more concerned, we are more concerned of what do they mean that they are sound, at the same time they need additional equity.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
Certainly. So we're a very healthy company. We've never had any financial difficulties, but to take on this project, what we want to do is we're going to invest our own money. So we'll invest our own money, but we also like to attract other investors, is what we call syndicate out the investment. And we have a network that we use to do that for the equity. The other thing is we do think as we look at this project, it is going to be, to make this project bankable, to make it commercially viable, we do believe the government's going to have to provide some limited financial support for the project. Other questions?
My question is about the understanding the point of the scope of the project.
Okay.
As we know that from the description of the project, said that we can the project must accommodate approximately 80,000 passengers,
Okay.
20 for the large and then 60 for the smalls, together with together with the commercials and commercial spaces.
Right.
So just come to the point of evaluation criteria, we see that the government, the AGM said that the government want to deliver the project quickly and within the budget. How we can meet the scope of the project?
Oh, we don't think the size of the project is going to be any problem at all. We're going to be able to build it out to the size that you need to meet your specifications. That's not a problem. In terms of doing it quickly, we can mobilize our engineers and our construction personnel very quickly, our subcontractors. It's going to help. We look at this as a partnership between us and you, the government. It would be helpful that you can get some of the permitting done ahead of time. But if that's all done, we'll get it done within budget, ahead of schedule. Other questions for AJM? Oh, wow, a lot over here, okay.
I would like to add on the same point here on the managerial and the key personnel. Dialect, the criteria they have said the dialect that we need a person with at least 15 years of experience. But here dialect said that attractive talent, local planning, engineering, and film will self-perform construction. It didn't state the experiences. How long are they working on this project?
Yeah, these are, what we're doing is here in Tanzania, we've reached out to some of the more well-respected local firms and we want to engage them. It's our reputation on the line as well. So just as you asked for their experience, we're doing that. We're seeing about having them join us. And of course, we want to meet your criteria. Other questions? Oh, over here.
One of the requirements that we wanted is that you should at least be able to have 2 million as bond, 2 billion as bond. But then we see that you want a reduction of 1 billion.
Right.
So in case we decide not to give you that reduction, what's your alternative plan?
Yes, that's a good question. So a $2 billion bond has an expensive premium. And what our concern is that premium, by us paying more, we're going to have to build that cost into the project, which, by the way, so will our competitors as well. We're not sure you need that high of a bond, and the cost of that bond is going to get passed through into the project, which eventually will get passed through to the users of the project. So we would argue that the bond should be lower. If we must, if it's an absolute requirement that we have a 2 billion shilling bond, we will get the bond, but that cost will be built into our model. Other questions for AJM? If not, we will, oh, one more right here.
When you said that you can find some other source to get finance so that to execute the projects. But I being as a government, I would say, and I would argue that I've given you a condition that you have to prove beyond reasonable doubt you are able to execute the project.
Right.
But the moment you start saying that I will either get loan or solicit from other sources, that is to me as a government is very risky, very doubtful, because it is very uncertain to get or not to get the money.
What we will do is when we submit our final proposal, our financial proposal, we'll provide you evidence of that we've secured that funding. We will give you letters of intent for that. Other questions, or should we move on to the next proposer? Oh, right here.
I just wanted to know exactly, in the year of experience, you said that you have to have at least 15 years of experience. But here at AJM, I have less than 15 years of experience in planning and engineering, but I have more than that in construction operation and maintenance. So will I have to get the offer or
yes,
a bit down?
Let me explain that. So we are primarily a construction company. We do have in-house planning and engineering capabilities. Now, the people we only started our planning and engineering department 10 years ago, so it does have less than 15. However, the individuals that we recruited to man those departments They are very well experienced, each of them, and we'll provide you their profiles when we submit our proposal. Each of those individuals has more than 15 years of experience. All right, any other questions for AJM, or should we move on? Oh, wow, a lot of questions for AJM.
If they've write the proper wording on the issue of the scope, what can you say about, is it the proper way of writing the scope of the work?
So in terms of the scope of the work, oh, are you asking if the government wrote the scope correctly?
I'm asking for the AGM,
yes,
comparing with the government. The government is putting the scope of the work.
Right.
But I'm asking for AGM, do you think you are an advisor here? Do you think this is the right way of writing the scope for AGM?
In terms of this, are you asking AJM or are you asking me?
I'm asking you as a consultant.
Oh, as a consultant.
Yeah.
We'll save that question to the end of the exercise. Okay. Right now, you just have AJM here. Okay. If not, we're in the interest of time, we'll move on to the next party, Gargantuan developer. Any questions for Gargantuan? Yes.
You mentioned that we should have at least 2 billions.
Yes.
But in Gargantuan developer, they said that they meet bonding requirements.
Yes.
So that is really confusing because.
Oh, sure. Sorry. No problem. We can do the $2 billion performance bond.
Okay.
No problem.
All right.
What about this good-looking guy? Any questions for Budarazzi Big Bad Building, B4, BBBB? I think our last one is Acme. Do we have any questions for Acme? All right. So we got through our questions. So at this point, no more questions. I'm not the developer. Now I'm back at being John Budarazzi, lecturer. So what you need to do is now it's your turn to score these proposals. Okay, so some of it you can use from the answers you received. Go through, score them. Remember, you're going to score them both on a pass-fail basis and on their evaluation criteria. And then what I'd like you to do is, after you score each proposal, just fill this out. You can fill it out right on your computer if you want to. Fill it out, and then we'll review the results amongst everyone. All right? I'm going to go table by table. And when I come to your table, I want you to do two things. I want you to give me the pass-fail score as I call out each one. Actually, I'll ask you, for instance, like AJM, you give me the pass-fail, and you give me the evaluation score. Okay? And we'll just keep going down. Okay, so who's going to give me the scores for this table? Okay, so for AJM, what was the pass-fail? 4, okay. And what was the evaluation score? 78, okay. And then for Gargantuan? 4.5. Okay. The evaluation score? 65. Okay. Ned? 4.5. Okay. The score?
95.
Wow, okay. Yours truly?
4.5.
Okay. Yeah?
Score 90.
90?
Yeah.
Come on, what's wrong with you? Okay. And the last one?
The last is 4.5.
And the score?
73.
73, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Next table.
AGM, the percent fail is 3.
I'm sorry, what was it?
3.
3, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Gargantuan?
3.5.
Okay. Ned?
4.
Okay. Me?
4.
Okay. Acme?
4.
Okay. Oh, I forgot to do this. Okay, that's all right. What was their evaluation scores?
20.
20. Woo.
Yep.
I don't want you grading me, but I guess you're going to. Gargantuan?
46.
Okay. Ned?
85.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Oh, you just got 100.
Oh! Doesn't mean I'm going to give you a higher score, by the way. Okay, Acme?
22.5. 22.5.
22.5.
Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty precise. Okay. All right, thank you, Mercy. Next table?
2.5.
2.5, okay. For Gargantuan?
4.
4?
4, yeah.
Okay. For
4.
Mr. White?
4.5.
Okay. For the good-looking guy?
4.5.
4.5, okay. And for Acme?
4.5.
Okay. And then for the evaluations?
57.
57?
Yes.
Okay. For Gargantuan?
77.
77, okay. For Mr. White?
82.
Okay. Me?
90.
90?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's about right. All right. And Acme?
68.
68. All right, thank you very much. The next table?
2.5.
For AJM, right?
Yes.
For Gargantuan?
5.
Okay. For Ned?
4.
4, okay. For me?
4.
4, okay. And for Acme?
Also 4.
Also a 4, okay. And then for the evaluation?
60.
60, okay. Next one?
88.
88. Okay, for Ned?
95.
95. He hasn't seen a 95 since high school. Okay, for me?
85.
Wait a minute. Okay, for Acme?
75.
75, okay. All right, so next table?
2.5.
All right.
5.
I'm sorry?
5.
5, okay.
4.
4, okay.
5.
Okay.
4.5.
All right. And then for the evaluations?
For the scores, AGM is 46,
All right.
82,
Okay.
88,
All right.
90,
Okay.
60.
60, okay. Thank you very much. And then finally, right here?
Even for the compliance, 3, AGM, AJM.
3, right. Okay, for Gargantuan?
4.5.
Okay.
Then 4.
4, yep.
4
Yep.
and 4.
Okay, and then going down the evaluations?
55.
Okay.
44.
Okay.
70.
Yep.
90.
Okay.
62.
Okay. So, first things first. You could see in the exercise, it was purposely designed where there were still a lot of open questions. The criteria was a little fuzzy, and you end up having to make a lot of judgments. Now, it is interesting. A lot of the, particularly in the compliance, actually a lot of the scores are pretty consistent among the groups. So it kind of worked out. I'm curious, if you had to figure out which ones would be the final 3 that you would move to the short list, let me go table by table. I'll start with, we'll go in reverse order. So in your group, which 3 do you think would make it to the short list, if you had a look? I think it probably would be, looks like Ned, myself, yeah, Ned would get in there.
They get twin.
Acme.
Let's see, Acme. No, I think, yeah, you're right. I think and myself and Acme. I think you're right. That would be it. Let's try the next table.
U,
Okay.
Ned White,
Thank you.
and the G. What is U? G. Start with
Oh,
G.
the gargantuan?
Yeah.
Okay. and probably Ned White.
Yes.
Right? Okay. All right. Next table.
Ned White.
Yep.
Second, Gagtanam, 88.
It looks like gargantuan, maybe?
Yes.
Right? And then maybe
Third.
myself?
Third one, you.
Okay. We like that. And then back here, all the way in the back.
Ned White.
Yep.
Butarazzi.
Yeah. And who else? Is it gargantuan? I think so. Right?
We put Acme. Acme.
Acme, okay. Okay. Yep. All right, fair enough. And then next table, Mercy.
Yes, we have you, Butarazi,
Yeah.
with 100 score. Then we have Nate White.
Yep.
And then we have Gargantuan.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one more table right here.
Yeah. We have AGM,
Okay.
Butaraz, and Ned White.
Okay. So if we were just to grossly kind of put it up, it looks like gargantuan, Ned, and myself would be in the short list. I compete against Ned White all the time. I'm pretty confident. So what I wanted you to get from this exercise is kind of a feel. There are a lot of things. I want you to get a feel kind of what goes into trying to evaluate the submissions. It's not an overly precise process, but you want to be consistent. You want to be consistent. So, it's interesting. You wouldn't go, if we were in an organization, let's say a large PPP unit or say within the Ministry of Finance, you wouldn't say, oh, you evaluate these 3 proposals, you evaluate these 3, and you evaluate those 3. Because there's going to be, you're not going to be consistent. It's going to be in the eye of the beholder. All right? It's going to be very subjective. The other thing is I want you want to interact with who proposes with you. So you had questions. You had a lot of questions for AGM, for instance. I think part of that was a function, it was the first one you looked at.
Well, I just want to ask, for example, you are a government and you set up your criteria and you call for the, qualification.
Right.
Yeah, and you set the scores, and the pass and fail scores also. But then at the end of the day, you have similar results, similar scores from, example, 3 companies. How can you go about it?
In the RFQ, we really are focusing on qualifications. In the RFP, we want to see what their technical proposal is. We want to see what their financial proposal is. So in the interest of time, we kind of compress this. But it is a good question that you could, whether it's at the RFQ stage or at the RFP stage, you can have a situation where they're very, very close. And you don't want to let everybody in, but if you have a situation, let's say you're hoping to shortlist 3 firms, and you have 1, 2, 3, and the firm that came in 4th is they are just this close to being in. You can make the policy decision like, you know what, we should put them in. Let's see what they actually come up with. Now, there's an exception to that, is that you want to be consistent. So in your documents, in your RFQ, if in the RFQ you said, we will have a short list of 3 firms, don't all of a sudden change the rules after they all come in and say, we will now have 4 firms. You really don't want to do that. You could write an exception for yourself, but you really want to be consistent. I think it's generally, if you say it's 3 firms, stick to 3 firms. Now, you might have to do some more investigation between the ones that are ranked 3rd and 4th and really think about it. I don't think during the RFQ stage, it's not like at an RFP stage, if two firms are very close in their financial proposals, as I said, you could ask them to sharpen the pencil and come up with a better financial proposal. That's to your benefit. They don't have that at the RFQ stage. It's their qualifications are their qualifications. Now, that's about as best I could do.
No, that's fine. I just wanted
Other questions?
Based on your experience, actually, I would like to know why in the World Bank guidelines, and also when you observed the Africa Development Bank guidelines, on the shortlisting stage, they just only allowed only 6 firms. Only 6 firms, and within those 6 firms is only 2 firms should be allocated from the regional countries, not more than that 2 firms. So I just put amazing why on the World Bank guideline and the Africa Development Bank guidelines just only allow only 6 firms.
The short answer is, in terms of why, the short answer is very short. I don't know. I'm not. I won't pretend to simply give you an answer. I think, in terms of the number of shortlisted firms, so maybe this is a good question to think about, is what is the right number of firms to shortlist, and how do you figure that out? Well, remember what we said earlier. If you let everybody in, the chances of a firm winning go down, right? It's just simple math, simple percentages. If it's tough to say, like, okay, we're going to have 6 firms. I think that's a little too much. But earlier on, when we were at, say, that expression of interest stage, right? And we're doing our market sound to see who might be interested in this project. If we have an indication that, boy, there's going to be a lot of firms that want to do this. We could have 12, we could have maybe even 14 firms doing it. Well, you know what? Probably says, you know, we probably are fine getting away with having 4 firms on the short list and saying that's what we're going to do. 4 out of 12, that's 1/3, that's 33%. That's pretty good. But on the other hand, we say, you know, there's probably only 6 firms that are going to respond to this. You don't necessarily need to say, oh, we'll let 4 in and, you know, and the other 2 won't go in. I don't think there should be a hard and fast rule. You just have to have a feel for how the market's going to respond.
So today, what we wanted to do, we will, unless anybody objects, we want to adjourn a little early to give you time to start and take the online test. But please do find time to get online to take the test. Now, are there any questions? No questions? Okay. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Congratulations on completing this assignment. We hope that you now know a little bit more about how to manage PPP tenderings and procurement.
Here are some takeaways from this module. In this module, we learned that sound procurement equals good governance, fosters competition, and generates value for money.
Let me also provide you with a couple of takeaway points on managing PPP tenders and procurement. Point number 1 is that it takes time to manage PPP tenders. There's often many reasons for delays, many reasons why other stakeholders will come up with for reasons that projects require more analysis. So the management of PPP procurements needs to be tightly done according to a time schedule. Number 2, related to that, is that the additional analysis that competitive tenders require is the source of providing better value for money. Governments, bidders, transaction advisors, lenders, and others will all insist that all risks be identified, that analysis be done in detail. This is the source of better long-term value for money in PPP projects. Thank you very much for joining us for this 4th module on managing PPP tenders and procurements. Please watch the following video, module number 5, which talks about PPP contract management and performance monitoring techniques. Thank you.